Welcome back to the Two Pondering Pagans. I'm Rook.
And I'm still on.
We're going to be doing a mini series on shadow work using tarot.
Ooh, even though I told him to stop after saying shadow work. Part of the shadow work is learning about the things you don't like about yourself
Oh, yeah.
or others, such as not
Others.
listening clearly. Talking about you.
Oh, I'm aware.
I know you're aware. So we actually are going to do this. Uh, we're going to call it a mini series because we don't know how long it's going to take or how much it's going to be or what's going to happen. On shadow work right now, we're going to kind of use tarot to do this shadow work. We are not using like my process that I've used before. We're actually using a book to kind of guide us called Tarot Shadow Work Using the Dark Symbols to Heal by Christine Jette.
Jetty.
Uh, Jette. I don't think it's available anymore. Like I think it's out of print. Now, she has other books that are still in print, but this one is particularly out of print. So, which is unfortunate because in the first 10 pages that I've read so far, I really like kind of how it goes.
That's really good.
Yeah. And I like how it's very Jungian. Like it really does follow that Jungian psychology, which I'm very excited about and I really enjoy. So um I know one of the first things that kind of stuck out to me was and just for anybody who's watching, I'm going to be looking off to the side because my actual computer with information in my notes is to the side instead of at the camera difference is kind of off a little bit. But one of the first things that kind of jumped out to me in the not the acknowledgments, what do you call it? The prologue was kind of like identifying uh, the author's shadow and kind of what shadow uh, creeped up for her. And I thought that was very telling of the shadow work because that's part of it. The first thing is identifying it and then confronting it.
Yeah, and that uh, about a week ago, I was watching a presentation by a famous person, and she was telling her story, and she used a different word, but it was basically she was saying at these points in her life the first time she met her shadow, the second time she met her shadow, and the
Hmm.
third time. So it's really neat. I like how she explained the shadow and what it is, made up of the parts we might find troubling, and then the positive traits that maybe we didn't feed and nurture.
Yeah. And there's a lot to it. Like there's a lot of different references that we can pull in, which I'm going to talk about. But one thing I wanted to kind of lay out first is her discussion about just like shadows in general, shadows in literature and myth, like, expressions of a shadowy figure or the valley of the shadow of death or the shadow suspect or we shadow the person we're trailing or cast a large shadow. There are all these phrases that talk about the shadow and how it is, and yet we don't really talk about it. And so that's kind of like the literary shadow or the story shadow. Then there's kind of like the spiritual shadow, which most of us is what we're talking about when we're talking about shadow work. It's like a snippet of the Jungian shadow, which the Jungian shadow did change over time. I think initially it was the specific time frame from young, very young childhood, 2, 3 years old when you start formulating a personality, and then leading on up into your early 20s. It's all those things that you stuffed away that you didn't like or somebody else didn't like or you thought would keep you from love and tucking them all away and um and bringing them back out, I guess, as adults.
All those times you say, "Oh crap," you have an idea and you think, "I can't do that. There's no way I
Mhm.
could do that."
And that's your shadow. Um, I think it's really another really cool thing about the shadow that kind of showed up in here, and it showed up in other things that I've done, like reading of Jungian and psychology classes I've taken in the past, is the fact that when you tuck away these parts, like let's say Now I'm bringing in something actually from a podcast that I was listening to, and I think I don't know if you've listened to the episodes yet. I don't want to mention them just yet. But in a nutshell, what they are talking about is um, how the shadow part self, let's say in your household, um, being very tough is frowned upon. It's more about being humble and being kind. So all aggression is pushed away, and so you tap your aggression and you tuck it, you put it away. It becomes part of your shadow. But not only does it become part of your shadow, it never develops into maturity because aggression is a human emotion, and no human emotion should be blocked, right? So then, when it comes back out as an adult, as a shadow self, it comes out raw and primitive and uncivilized, and that's where it causes problems. And I think that that's something that's really important to know about shadow in general as we're kind of learning, what we're doing here with shadow work. What is it that we're actually trying to work on? So I like that whole process of uh, identifying and thinking of the shadow not as just something that's tucked away, but it's kind of tucked away and allowed to stew and wallow in its own, primitiveness.
Yeah, and the same thing can be if you're told, man or woman doesn't matter. As a kid, don't cry. You don't do that in front of people. A couple things
Mm-hmm.
could happen later. Either you don't know how to show emotion, or when you do get out and to show emotion, it's not appropriately. Maybe you cry too much, or
Mm-hmm. Or not at all, or whatever the case may be. Those are all, I think, really good examples of kind of, you know, I guess one of the points. So as I was going through the first couple of pages of this book, I was trying to pull in points of things that I've heard of or already know about Jungian psychology, psychiatry, dream interpretation, um, mythos, even, and coming up with a couple of points to kind of summarize headlines of what we're learning so far. Because really, Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, he really is, well, not really. He is the father of a lot of this process. He actually was a contemporary to Freud and really agreed in some things, but really disagreed in others, and a lot of it having to do with symbolic things, and interest in paranormal and mysticism and all these other things that are part of the human psyche and how it made us feel. So, um, a couple of points that I kind of got out of the first couple pages of the book was number one, that you have to define your shadow. You have to give it space and recognize that it exists, because you can't do anything with it until you say it's there. You don't even have to tell what's in it or what makes it up, but you have to find it and say that, oh, I have a shadow. It's there. You have to acknowledge it.
yeah, I made a couple notes on that too. About the shadow, defined as a person's unresolved inner conflicts and unexpressed emotions. Uh, you should accept and integrate the shadow. Don't reject it. If you integrate it and accept it, it can lead to healing.
Mm-hmm. One thing about that is, um, you know, integrating it is the goal, right? But I'm starting to think just and learn that it's never finished. Like you're never. It's a lifelong process of continuing to keep the shadow integrated because new shadow creeps up. Even though Jungian psychiatry would say that it's really formulated as a child, and I think other things can occur and cause some of those changes that need to be continued to address. So um, yes, integrating your shadow is the ultimate goal, but I think it's an ongoing, lifelong process. And from a spiritual perspective, it's really identifying, assessing, addressing, and working through you know the shadow feelings and bringing them into the world, and calling the baby ugly. They're not all pretty. Some babies are ugly. Call it what it is. Deal with it. Rock it. Love it. You know.
The shadow can, to what you just said, shadow can contain messages for personal growth.
Mm-hmm.
It can also be your alter ego. Like I always say, and a lot of people have a different name, but I'll say, ooh, Brandon's going to have to come out. And Brandon is who I assign a name to when I'm angry or get firm or whatever I have to do. It's really me, of course, but that's how we justify or get strength, I guess, to do certain things.
Yeah. I I'm trying to find a note, so it wasn't related to this specifically, um, but it was very, very beneficial in my own. Oh, I think I found it. Okay. So this is from another book I'm reading. That's on shadow work, and I found it very, very appropriate to this part of shadow work because we're going to actually do some shadow work and some things, and we're going to use the tarot to do it. So we're going to be sharing, I think, part of our shadows and shadow work, just so we have that documented, but to show people how, in some ways, you can do it. So right now, we really want to spend some time, especially on this first recording. I don't even want to call it an episode, really. Just we're recording whatever happens, right?
And I like this.
Um,
We're actually in two separate places for the first time.
yeah,
It's pretty cool.
but I think so. But I think that right now we're really just trying to get a feel and share a feeling of what the shadow could be for you. And so this particular phrase I really liked, and it's from Owning Your Own Shadow, a book. I'll quote it somewhere in the show notes. But to draw the skeletons out of the closet is actually relatively easy, but to own the gold in the shadow is terrifying. And what they're talking about is there's in your shadow self, there's a lot of positive things that are relegated to the shadow too. It's not just everything bad about you. It's things that you are maybe uncomfortable with or ashamed of, like tooting your own horn or admitting that you're good at something. That may be something you can't do, and that's tucked in your shadow. But that's a positive thing when you bring it out, right? That's gold. That's the gold in your shadow that's hard to deal with because sometimes it's harder to deal with the things that are good than the things that are bad. And I just thought that that was very meaningful part of that book, um, to kind of know, and also kind of supports the idea that nobody should ever say there's only one way to review your shadow or deal with shadow stuff or work through these things. This is just how we're doing it, and who knows what's going to happen.
And I think it's pretty neat about the tarot. Um, and Jung actually only wrote ever one sentence about the tarot, and it was the image series of tarot cards were the descendants of the archetypes of transformation. Um, I had some other notes here. Oh, no, Richie.
And just to kind of define an archetype, so
Ah,
um, there's a lot of things that reference archetypes, and archetypes generally are collections of like behaviors or thoughts or things that are attributed to a type, like the archetype of the green man. That's one of the things that I hold dear and I kind of revere in my spiritual practice. The archetype of the green man is the man of nature, the horn god, the one that is connected. And that's an archetype, a look. It's got an aesthetic to it. It has a feeling to it, a primitiveness, and that's an archetype. You have quite a few archetypes, actually, many more than we would ever be able to name specifically. But do you have any notes like regarding the archetypes that kind of fit into this?
I had, yes, let me find them. The point in the first part of the book was that this book makes is the entire human psyche can be mapped out using 22 cards of the major arcana. Each card is a different quality, made of dual natures, light and dark. And I had to look up what that archetype was, and one of the things, explanations or definitions I saw was that their attributes or qualities seem to be given to the first humans. It actually had in the dictionary archetypes as it relates to Jungian psychology too.
Yeah, well, I mean, the shadow description or the shadow really as a theory or process or whatever you want to call it, archetype came out of Jung. And that's where it really started. Um, and so the other, there's other archetypes. There's the like the persona or the archetype of your what makes you you. He's the nice guy. He's the strong guy. He's the big guy. He's those kind of things. And then there's the anima, and the anima is kind of like the female caring archetype. There's the animus, which is the male autonomy, hierarchical, and then of course, like you said, the shadow, which I have in my notes here to reference when we're talking about the shadow, about these darker, undeveloped aspects that remain wild. There is a book by Robert Bly that I have actually probably at the house now because I have lots of Amazon books. But there's an excerpt from it, and kind of like a short story version of one of his writings. It's a single page, and it talks about the long bag. And in the long bag, it says, from the ages of 3 on up, we start stuffing things into this bag. This bag being our shadow self, right? And we have, well, mom doesn't like it when I do that, so that's going in the shadow. I'm ashamed of that as a 10-year-old. I should put that in the shadow. And then you go into high school and you put all of these things into the bag, and then you continue on into your young adulthood and your 20s, and you're still adding the things in this bag, and then you spend the whole rest of your life trying to unpack the bag, and untangle all the things that got put in there, because there's gold in that bag, and that gold is working through the shadow to the end result and finding the things in the parts of your personality that need to be expressed. But those things that go in that bag, they get stale, they get stinky, they get rotten, they get primitive and old. And so that kind of does my point number 2. Or point 1 for me was, defining a shadow, giving it space, acknowledge its existence. And point 2 is you have to walk towards, with, and through your shadow. And then the third point I got out of this first section was, there's many ways to start working with shadow. Tarot is only one of them. It's really good, it seems, for beginners, because it kind of works through, like you said, that statement that Jung said, the one thing. The image series of tarot cards were the descendants of the archetypes of transformation. So we've defined archetypes. Kind of need to look at what are archetypes of transformation. So these are the things, or these are the pieces that go into what would transform life and us into bigger and better things. Can kind of be looked at like civilization, I think. So the more civilized somebody comes, the further away from everything you are, which usually means the bigger your shadow is, because there's more things that you have to work through to get back to who you really are. And so we're talking about, like, on our thing we're doing here is really personal shadow. We're not talking about like the collective shadow, because there's a collective shadow. And it's also not meant to be a book review. It's just us doing shadow work. Right now, we're using the book. We're going to continue on, I think, using this book and tarot, and then trying other methods and things, and continuing to share that.
Yeah,
I just kind of wanted to point out.
you had a really good method you shared with me that I'd like to do throughout this, regardless if the book does it or not.
Yeah, well, the book's going to do it different because I kind of jumped ahead,
Ooh.
which is fine, because I wanted to know what its process was. It's going to use certain, which I like. It's going to use certain tarot layouts, tarot circles, or tarot spreads, I should say. And that's going to be, kind of, I think, where we're going to kind of see the difference in how I do it versus how they do it. But we do both. Because again, shadow is a forever thing. We're not going to go through and integrate our shadow by the end of this series. Yeah.
Oh.
But the book is kind of the guide. And really, the shadow that we're working on is our personal psyche parts, our personal shadow that have been shamed or banished or repressed and unexpressed for ourselves. And I feel like some of this may get a little uncomfortable depending on what we see, but whatever we see is whatever we're going to talk about, and that's just going to be what it is.
Yeah. Things you can't face in yourselves or tolerate in others.
Projection. That was a big point too. I think I've looked at projection from a psychological standpoint differently, and I have a different theory and aspect on it now. Because I do it. Like, I am very bad at projection. Like I do a projection a lot. I'm projecting often. I think we all do. I do think it's interesting that Jung actually says projection is actually healthy, but it can become unhealthy really quickly. So, projecting kind of can help you identify what it is you don't like about yourself. And I think that goes on to kind of what you were talking about earlier. The why did I do that and all that.
Yeah, or like if you've ever been said something to somebody or about somebody and be like, why the hell did I say that? I don't feel that way. I mean, I don't think that I've done that so many times. I know to you, I'm like, why did I say that? I don't think that.
Yeah, we were just talking about it the other day. I keep saying I hate my job.
Yeah.
I'm like, why am I saying I hate my job so much? Because when I sit down and think about it, I really don't. I hate some of the things that I have chosen, and this is the shadow part. I have made a decision that takes me away from my home and family and dogs, and I'm continuing to do that, and I feel guilty about it. So if I blame my job, not my fault. When really I could decide to do something different, and that would fix that problem. And that is going to continue to be a hot button point for me until I do change it. I recognize that. Scarlett kind of threw that one at me real hard, but she was absolutely correct. Sometimes somebody else has to tell you what your shadow is, I guess.
Yeah.
Lord, that was a rough one.
I
It
do
was
know
good.
one thing. I was kind of like, not even, I don't know what, like in a mucky mood, not depressed, not real anxious, just like, ugh. And since since we've started even just talking about this, it seemed a little lighter because because now I can kind of put a name to what some of these things are and maybe have a start to working through it. I say it too a lot. I hate my job, but it's not really the job. It's I hate that I don't know how to properly manage everything at times and how to have set boundaries and say, yeah, I'm not going to do this or I'm just not going to worry about it.
Yeah. Do you ever think that it's like, and I've had this conversation, so I'll say it based on a friend of mine that says, I like everything about my job, I just hate the families.
Yeah,
Is that potentially projection for being and feeling guilty that you hate somebody in your own family?
it could be.
Like a disappeared parent or, whatever the case is. But those are the kind of things that I think shadow brings out in us and helps us try to work through. And that's what is exciting about it for me. I've done shadow work before. I've constantly done shadow work. I've done it specific and directed, which is what I kind of call this. This is not just shadow work to do shadow work or shadow working, because it needs to be done. This is directed specific shadow work where you're deciding to go into and start pulling some things out and addressing them. Are we going to address everything? Absolutely not. Um, but I think we are going to find a lot of relief. I'm already like you finding relief just going through here. And as I'm doing it, I've got all these notes all over my page about things that I do and I know I do, but I've never written them down.
Mm-hmm.
Like one realization I have specific to um, this first part of shadow work at now this kind of iteration of it is that often when I get so overwhelmed and frustrated with an individual to where I can't take it anymore, I'm just frustrated. I have this internal dialogue in my head, or really a monologue, where I literally scream everything I've ever wanted to say at a person all at once, and I just tell them off in my head. But I don't do it in person because I'm holding back my own feelings to protect other people's feelings. And by doing that, I am repressing that energy and not allowing it to come out. So what happens is it goes in this big internal monologue in my head, it never gets said, and then I kind of treat that person a little passive aggressively instead.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to hurt their feelings by coming out and telling them how I really feel, because it's not really how I feel. It's just not dealing with it at the time that it happens feels whiny and annoying, so I don't say it, and then it just all comes out at one point. So that's something I don't like about myself. If you say something that's frustrating to me, I can tell you. We've got that part of our relationship. We're very honest about that, but I won't say it to people at work, and then I'll be like, I'm so sick of being around her. When really, I'm not sick of being around her. I didn't deal with something that made me uncomfortable, and now I don't want to be around her because I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, you go.
Whose problem is that? Mine.
Yeah.
Mine.
Same thing about me. I don't really like conflict, and I'll do the same thing. I won't speak up appropriately, but then I'll talk shit about the person to other coworkers or just have negative thoughts when you know it's all unnecessary.
Hmm.
That's my problem. I hung up on somebody the other day at work. I was so tired of the phone ringing, I just picked it up and hung it up, and it felt damn good. But was that
That's not
appropriate?
good.
It wasn't appropriate, but it felt good. I just click. What is that? I need to examine that.
Yes, you do. Yeah, I want to examine lots of things. And I think that's one of the cool things that's going to come about this little series that we are going to examine things that come up. I want to examine why I do those monologues because I don't feel that way about people that they come out about. It's one thing that I just lose it with. That's like tips it over that I could have addressed by simply talking. Um, I want to explore why I get so angry at certain things that should not cause anger. I think that is a projection of weakness, of feeling inept or incapable or too weak. Um, so I project anger out on those that I can because it's easy to do. Now I wouldn't say I get to the point of like uh, saying like an anger issue. Like I don't blow out completely melt down, but I say stuff that I shouldn't say, or I react in ways that I shouldn't react that are stressful for no reason. Like I'm mad at the fish because they were fighting and they had babies. Like how do you get mad at fish in a fish tank? Granted, I didn't go in and beat the fish up, but why would I be mad? Like I was actually angry about it. Like how dare you try to bite my hand when I put my hand in there?
No.
And I'm like, they had babies and I didn't know. And so I was like, I could have, like, that doesn't even, like, tell me that makes sense, right? So the only answer to that is that I have to have there's something in my shadow that I need to address. And this is the place to do it from. I can say that shadow work works, like doing directed specific shadow work, which means taking an active role in identifying and working through shadow work is excessively beneficial. I do want to add the little caveat though that severe mental disease disorders, illnesses, uh, therapy is a good thing. Whether you feel like you're sick or not, whether you feel like you have an illness or not, everybody, even the most well-adjusted person in the world, should have a therapist that they trust and that works for them. Not just any therapist works for everybody. But I really want to work on dispelling that myth of therapy is a bad thing. Therapy is a great thing and it should be done. And shadow work is not a replacement for actual therapy in significant mental illnesses or issues with like PTSD or significant abuse and things. And shadow work can bring about those feelings that make you uncomfortable, and you should seek professional help. Absolutely.
I know even setting it up, I was feeling kind of bad, anxious, and different things. And I set up an appointment with a therapist, and I'm doing this, but I was even like, why are we embarrassed to say it? Like I was embarrassed to tell my boss, hey, I have a a doctor's appointment this day and I need off, and I just told her why. I mean, why we shouldn't be embarrassed because the more we ignore or hide it or fight it, the more that stuff can control you. Like if you
Yep.
don't deal with it, and there's a specific thing, and I won't say what, but that I didn't tell you for years and years and years. And there was another part of my life that was blocked by this. And until I broke down and told you, the truth, this was about something in my past, not only did a huge boulder get lifted off of me, but then the other part of my life moved forward. It seems like a week later it moved forward. So when you would address things, for me personally, it helped and removed the stagnation. And
Yeah.
it's true.
And that whole issue wasn't about telling me. It was about not hiding it yourself.
Right.
I mean, to me, that's the shadow work. That was the release of the shadow. It was that part of it. But that takes me to the fifth point that I learned, and that's where I kind of stopped on page 9 of the book. And that is, the more you fight your shadow, the more it controls us. You said it. And that is my point number 5. See right here?
Look.
Point number 5.
And that was the last thing I wrote on my notes. See right here? Can you see it? I can't see it. Yeah.
I can't see it, but maybe in the video.
Yeah.
So I do want to hit just a couple of the only other note that I didn't really share yet was we're going to use the book as a guide, right? And so we may not agree with everything that it says, but we are going to follow it to kind of see what we get out of it, because I think it'll be nice if we get something really beneficial out of it, which I already am, that we can share that with other people and say, hey, this is something that you can use to kind of benefit you, and you can follow along with us as we do this each week and as we talk it through. So we're going to follow it as it's kind of laid out, but we're also going to at some point do the process as I've done it, using the linear path of the major arcana. But remember that, shadow aspects, lots of archetypes like the saboteur, the martyr, the victim, the addict, the tyrant. But it also includes the creative person, the talented person, the artist, the unexpressed positives, quote unquote, of shadow, right? So those have to be remembered too. And shadow can be hidden in daily life. And some of the things that you might want to be able to see where your shadow is talking to you is when you say, why did I do that? Or that's not even what I meant. Or seeing traits that you dislike in others, but you don't dislike them when they're in yourself. Weird humor or inappropriate humor at things that, are maybe racial or cultural or sexual jokes about things that you're lightening of because of your feelings toward them. Slips of the tongue, or Freudian slips, dreams, daydreams, and fantasies. And those are the things that kind of stuck out when we're talking about just, what are things that your body or your mind is telling you, your psyche, your unconscious is telling you. Is like, hello, there's a shadow here I need you to deal with. It's going to kind of show up that way. And in the way that the shadow kind of behaves or relieves itself to you is through self-destructive behaviors towards yourself and or others, depression and anxiety, stealing, lying, envy, blame, betrayal, affair, all of those things. So anyway, I know that was kind of a long little piece there, but I wanted to hit those are the other parts of the notes that I hadn't really touched on. But I really think that this whole episode is really about saying, hey, you have a shadow. No matter how well adjusted you are, you still have a shadow. The shadow has things that we call bad and good, things that we are ashamed of, even if they're positive. And we have to identify it. We have to yank it around. We have to call it ugly. We have to pull it out. We have to work with it. And we are going to use the tarot to help us do that.
And for somebody like me, I kept hearing people talking about shadow work, shadow work. That's some shadow work. I didn't really know what the hell that meant or where to start. Finding Sal explaining and then finding this book around the same time to show a really cool method to start doing shadow work was really good. And a couple things I was thinking about, like if you're a person that can't take compliments from people, that's a shadow. If you're somebody that is a workaholic, that's a shadow. That's not normal. Those things aren't
It's a
normal.
shadow archetype.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if you're like me and would say, "Oh, don't talk to me until I've had 2 or 3 cups of coffee," well, that's a shadow. You need to see really why are you that irritable, and that's me.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, there's a book and I was going to show it, but I figured, you know what, I'll just post it in the post when I do editing. But there's a book by Robert A. Johnson. I'm going to probably finish it this week, and I'll give it to you to read next. It's called Owning Your Own Shadow: Understanding the Dark Side of the Psyche. Now, Robert A. Johnson has a lot of books that are related to this and this kind of work, and archetypes and some Jungian psychiatry and psychology. But there's some things in here I really disagree with that are really like you kind of have to kind of see it through the time frame of when it was written. You know, masculine and positive and feminine and negative and hard and soft. There's just certain things in it that are like just not appropriate for where we are in today's society. But the backdrop of how it deals with and explains the shadow process is great. So I would recommend that as a good book to start with. It's not even 100 pages long, I don't think, 110 maybe, um, and 117 actually. So quick read. Um, and that's where I got some of the information in here. Like there's a comment here. This is one of Jung's greatest insights is that the ego and the shadow come from the same source and balance each other. So it's like you're on a teeter-totter, right? And you got to balance your personality with the shadow and the conscious, the ego, and you want to balance it. And it's going to come in and out of balance throughout your life, and you have to do the work to get it into balance. Getting rid of your shadow, then you're not a whole person. You can't get rid of the personality traits. Yet they all have to be there to be present to exist. But it's things like that are in here that are very helpful, I think, to kind of support um, shadow work. And I think choosing to do shadow work as again a specific and what did I say? What's the other word?
Intentional,
Intentional. Yeah, an intentional, specific, directed is I think the term I used.
directed.
Process, as opposed to just dealing with it as you can. Like, yeah, you may be well adjusted, you may be dealing well. That's great. But literally taking it out and looking at it and making it an actual thing. I am excited.
Yeah. Another point I wrote down real quick that was I thought was interesting. What Tina is talking about the way the shadow can be dealt with when you're young and what might be undesirable behaviors as kids were strengthened by resisting those urges. But if we continue to resist them or deny them as an adult, it can stop us from fulfilling potential because we're not dealing with those things. I thought that was really
Yeah,
neat.
I do. You know what that makes me think of? Uh, it makes me kind of think of how, like, I don't want to say it's general knowledge, but I often hear, and I truly believe this. I believe that we are fully 100% magical beings, and that we lose that magic as we get older because it's adulted out of us. It's Peter Panned out of us. And we need that, and that magic is coming back to us, and we're taking that magic back. So to me, it's like the veil of shadow work has been significantly lifted just by the times that we're in. We are closer now to our shadow as we continue, which is odd to say as we get more technologically advanced and civilized. We're identifying that we have a shadow more and more and more because we're recognizing that um, childhood and adulthood are not distinct separations of our personality. They're results of each other, really. Um, and getting back to having that magic in your life is getting you back to closer to your whole self because you're reintegrating the part of you that could see the magical world. And that to me is beautiful. It reminds me of something else I read in one of these many books I'm reading now. I'm so confused at which one's where. But they talk about, and I don't know this because I don't know, like the story of, you know, Peter Pan and Tinkerbell and and Wendy. But apparently, Peter Pan is not himself until his shadow is sewn back on by Wendy. And I just thought that that was a very poignant point of saying if you don't have your shadow, you're not whole as far as personality. So it's not like you get rid of it. You don't cut it off or shave it off or change it. You learn it, you love it, you grow it, you work it, you bring it into the here and now, and that's the shadow work. But I just thought that was interesting about Tinker Bell and Peter Pan. I don't know why I keep saying it's not the story of Tinkerbell, it's Peter Pan.
Well,
Tinkerbell's in it.
she did have a couple of
Get
her own
apart.
movies
Yeah, she. Yeah,
in like mid 2000s.
yeah.
Well, that was our
So
first part that we read, and we've got another part to the first chapter, and it's probably setting us up for the exercises. I think the next section is tarot symbolism.
yeah,
Exciting.
there's a lot to go through. I think we've kind of split it into 10-page sections for us to talk about. This was the first 10 pages, which was the prologue and then the first half of the first chapter. The next 10 pages finishes out chapter one, I think. Um, and I'll be excited to kind of see as we go into the Descent into Darkness, which is the second chapter. So, um, again, not this. Our goal here is not really to do a book review, but to do a full shadow working using the tarot with the guidance of this book to kind of march out its ability to help us do that, and then hopefully that'll help somebody else that wants to do that.
Exactly.
So,
Our experience with it, with what we're doing. Yep.
hmm it's very exciting to me.
Well, I already feel better, so I'm happy.
Yeah. And I think we haven't even really talked about our own shadows yet. We've only kind of talked a little bit about how to kind of pull and work the shadow. And hopefully you've learned something, I think. I know I do, but those of you that are watching this, um, hopefully you're learning as well, going right along with us. If you don't have the book or access to the book, 'cause I don't even think you can get it. I tried to imprint. It was really expensive to get a used copy.
Like 80
And
bucks
I'm
or
not
something.
comfortable sharing a copy of a book like in a large scale. But I'm more than happy to like discuss the points of it in Discord. So we have a Discord channel for the Pondering Pagans, two Pondering Pagans. We will be sharing insights and things in there, of course, if you want, or just email us or send us a comment, put a comment here, and we'll kind of share what we can, um, and go from there.
Exciting stuff. I'm anxious, not anxious, I shouldn't use that word, because anxiety is part of my shadow. So I am excited appropriately to delve into this journey and begin.
Yep. Well, we've begun.
We've
We
begun.
beginned. All right. So until next week, um, you know, remember not to beat your shadow up. Give him a hug.
Yeah, and don't reject it, as uncomfortable it is, as it is. It only makes it worse.
Yep. So until next time, au revoir.
Thanks for joining.
Adios.
Thanks for hanging out. Au
Toodles.
revoir.